Hi and welcome to NewsReal with Joe and Neil.
I'm Joe.
And I'm Neil. And on this episode, we're going to discuss a pretty hot topic. White nationalism.
Sharp intake of breath.
Okay, so first things first, this isn't actually a show about white nationalism in that it's a show about white nationalism in quotes. So we're not here, two white guys taking a side on white nationalism per se, because, as we'll try to make the case in the next hour or so, it's largely a contrived, ridiculous, inapplicable concept to what's really going on out there. And yeah, okay, there's been a host of incidents with screaming headlines: white nationalism, extremism, white this and that, white supremacy. The point is, as we'll make clear, I think, that white nationalism / white supremacy is tacked onto events, onto people, onto ideas, when that's beyond just being an inaccurate description of what the event or idea or person is trying to say or do by carrying out things. It covers up a much broader phenomenon that's going on. If you like, it's layered over what's really happening, which is, in the broadest sense, a reemergence of a nationalist spirit globally. And it's not just in white countries, so the West. It's everywhere. Everywhere. Pakistan elects someone kind of Trump-like, not in the political mainstream, calls himself a nationalist. Mexico, same thing. Someone who's, well, in his case, he's traditionally of the left, but whatever. He's a nationalist, and it upset the status quo. And highbrow publications made the comparison, even though it's ridiculous on the face of it, of AMLO in Mexico with Donald Trump. Obviously, there's been a series of electoral shocks all across the West. And, of course, Putin. Putin is A and Xi. So China as well. Is Xi Jinping a white nationalist? Well, of course he's not. It's ridiculous. This argument's only working in the mainstream in the West at the moment because, well, it tells you something's afoot. It tells you there's a manipulation going on that's conflating extremist manifestations of that have white nationalism attached to it with something else, something much broader and frankly positive. It's given this horrible, pejorative, negative association by tacking on this extreme racial suggestion with it. Mm-hmm. Nationalism is not a dirty word, and Trump recently actually burst that little bubble when he spoke at a rally, declaring he was a nationalist, much to the shocking. The phony shock. It's not real shock. It's phony emoting back in CNN studios about how racist and evil and ancient that is. It's not. It's simple. It's pragmatic. It is what it is. He was giving an objective description, really, to what he's come to represent these last few years.
Yeah, there's various different levels, as I see it, to the situation. Obviously, nationalism, as you just said, is made a bad word. Nationalist is a bad word, but that's only very recently in recent history that, particularly in the last, let's say 3 or 4 years or 5 years, basically, that it's really become mainstream as a bad word and a word to denounce people for. He's a nationalist, but obviously, there are many nationalist causes throughout history that actually were predominantly leftist. You go back to the 20th century and pretty much many movements or struggles for that ordinary people took up against, let's say, the ruling classes, which is, absolutely a lefty kind of ideology fighting against the ruling classes. It's communist, right? Those struggles were defined as struggles for, generally speaking, struggles for national liberation. Ergo, all of those people involved in them, all of them lefties, many of them communists, were struggling for a nationalist cause. So it's absolute nonsense to take the word nationalist and say that it's, first of all, that it's a bad word or it's a bad thing per se, and secondly, that it's only the domain of the right. Obviously, nationalism throughout history, and like I said, within recent history of the last century, let's say, it was actually predominantly a left wing cause, or it was neither left nor right. It was simply ordinary people in a country struggling for liberation from often from some kind of foreign rule. So to call it left or right even is complete nonsense, you know. The other aspect to it is that on a broader scale, well, there's always been people who are more conservative, and nationalism has the connotation of people being kind of in group, focused on their in group. You can't really call what's an American nationalist. They're not nationalists in America because they're not trying to unite the nation. That's what nationalism means. It's like unite the nation, put the nation first, unite the nation around a single cause, etc. That's obviously not what's happening in America today. It's certain groups, and it's put on the conservative side. Therefore, it's kind of like an in-group of people. Let's say an in-group conservatives or Republican in-groups are the ones who are called nationalists. So the word is just meaningless, basically. That's why I don't like it. It has makes no sense from a historical perspective. It doesn't. Like with so many other words these days, they've changed the definition. The definition of the word has completely changed to the point that it makes no sense anymore.
Yeah.
It's just basically it's similar to the word fascist that has obviously re-emerged as well, and it simply means someone that you don't like. It's just a bad word. It's a slur that you use against someone that you don't like. If it happens to be appropriate or convenient for you to use the term nationalist, if it's fashionable to use that for your cause against the other cause, then today it's a nationalist. Like, for example, left-wingers will call people nationalists because it's opposite to them, supposedly. It obviously has connotation. It's linked with fascism, nationalism, fascism. Apparently they're exactly the same these days. Again, a change in the definition, but that's because, and that obviously links back to Hitler and the Nazis, right? They were nationalist. Yeah, as long as you include expansionist as well as nationalist, which is, to me, seems to be, it depends on your definition of it or how you understand it, but nationalism and expansionism today seem to be two opposite words. If you're a nationalist, you want an isolationist policy, you want to put your country first, you want to do the Trump's America first, make America great again thing, which by definition means that you would tend to not focus so much on expansionism abroad. But obviously, for anybody who has even a passing understanding of or awareness of Nazi Germany, they would agree that the Nazis were expansionist. Just ask the Poles, for example. So yeah, it's ridiculous. But in a broader scale, in a broader sense, I think what's happening today, not just in America and around the world, like you were mentioning, Neil, earlier on, is that people for the past 15 years or so or more, it was 15 years now? No, actually it's 17 years since 9/11, since the war on terror, let's say, and everything that has come as a result of the 9/11 attacks and the US-led war on terror. That has created a lot of chaos in the world in many different ways, a lot of insecurity among many different people. And as a result of that generalized kind of chaos and a sense of insecurity among people, it's a very natural thing for many people to want to kind of close ranks, effectively. It's almost like an unconscious drive that people have when they feel that the world is a scary place, for whatever reason, that they close ranks with their in-group. Yeah. And that is what has given rise to, in many places, to this claim that this is nationalism. It's not. And it's not the people who are feeling that quote-unquote nationalist urge to basically close ranks and identify with their in-group and their values within that group. It's not their fault. It's a natural response to the state of the world. And the state of the world, the chaotic state of the world that we live in today, is largely a result of people in positions of power in the major, particularly Western nations, creating that chaos as a result of their greed and desire to
Yeah, and ironically,
mess things
it's
up.
a chaos that comes from a kind of a hyper-nationalism where the West is dominant and will do whatever it takes to maintain it.
Mm-hmm.
They don't articulate it so, but it's still, it's imbued deeply in it. Obviously, you've got the America is an exceptional nation, manifest destiny. Yes, but we can do this because we can. Might makes right. We can intervene in all these countries. It's bizarre because that obviously stems from one nation over others.
Well, by hyper-nationalism, you mean globalism.
Right.
And nationalism is a response to globalism, i.e. nationalism is, as is understood today, again, as is being touted today, is essentially isolationism. And it primarily is being used in the US under Trump, but also in Western European countries. And it's a result of, it's a pushback against globalism, where America was the world has been the world's policeman, spreading its large S around the world and costing a lot of money. And it was Trump campaigned on that and won the election based on that idea that, listen, America is focusing far too much on other people's problems. What about our problems? So that gets him accused of being isolationist, which it is, but only in the context of America having spent the past 100 years spreading itself as far and as wide as possible around the world. So it's a reaction to globalism, effectively. So the point is that it's not a bad word. It's not something that, it's not, anybody thinks that it's just like, and the media wants to focus it down, wants to miss all those details that we just pointed out, or to ignore all those details we pointed out and focus only on divisive kind of headlines and language. At this point, they do it so much, they're either completely stupid or the mainstream media actually is doing someone's bidding, maybe their own bidding, or someone above them's bidding, to actually divide people within America and to a lesser extent within Europe, to divide them against each other, to create the conditions for a kind of a civil war, when it's completely unnecessary, it's completely irrational, and even more so, it's not actually happening. Someone is deliberately trying to foment civil discord and strife within the US. That's the only conclusion at this point.
The US intelligence community has the answer. Russia. Which is it's bizarre how it's there, it's available for them to use, but they don't use it in every instance. You see, normally in this situation, it's an external threat that is causing all of our chaos and our problems, right? And they will hit that now and again. We see Russia's behind all this internal division. But they obviously can't say that all the time, or they forget it themselves in the course of trying to explain why Trump bad and Trump supporters bad and what's wrong with them. You know what I mean? So it's kind of there as a nebulous explanation because it has to be, because in the end, the only thing that can unite people, they hope, around the status quo is the threat of something external.
Right.
Because, hammering on about grandmothers in Ohio who get together to bake cookies and try and raise money for Trump's campaign, it's not going to work. There needs to be behind that some malign foreign influence. So Russia is useful there. And the way it's all come together is doubly useful in that it's applicable, if you like, because they keep making comparisons with Putin's Russia. He's a nationalist.
Right.
He's a white supremacist.
And of course, it also serves their geopolitical agenda, the kind of US establishment's geopolitical war against Russia for their global dominance. So it's all kind of interconnected, in that respect, but it's kind of quite complex, but you can see the interconnections between the sowing divisions within the US. There are obviously divisions within the US, as we just described, as a result of the state of the world and the chaos in the world, that people tend to kind of like close ranks on their in groups, and at the same time, they like you said, they want to blame. They either blame white nationalist groups in the US for that, thereby exacerbating those. of course, yes, there are divisions. It creates divisions, but it's natural. But they can be managed. It should be managed. People should understand that. The world's a scary place. Immigrants and ISIS terror attacks and Muslim terror attacks over the past 15 years in the US have all created a climate of fear and insecurity in the US, and people are going to react to that, and they're going to close ranks. But they don't have to beat at each other's throats over it. They can try and understand and really put the blame where it should be, which is on the people who have created this climate of fear and chaos over the past 16 or 17 years since 9/11 attacks. But they don't. The powers that be don't want people to look towards the real source of that, and to try and address that problem and stop that kind of chaos being sown by the American establishment's policies. So instead they go, well, let's divide them against each other. Let's, divide and conquer type of thing. Let's make this a fight between the American people rather than have the American people fight against us or recogniise us as the kind of enemy, the corruption in the establishment, It's a story that's as old as time, basically, as human civilization. And now and again, like you said, they throw in the Russia thing to further distract the population from themselves. What better way to distract from for a government to distract from its own corruption and its own fault by pointing to a foreign government? In that way you tend to get the people on your side at the same time as you're dividing them against each other. They've got a two-track method going on. At the same time they're trying to divide the people against each other into factions, but they're also trying to unite them in a kind of weird kind of like kind of jingoism or xenophobia towards the the US establishment's geopolitical enemy on a broader global scale, which is Russia. So they're pretty smart people in that respect at manipulating people and sending out particular messages and ideas and infecting the minds of the people and trying to corral the people's thinking in various different ways, But very few people, no one in the US really today seems to be concerned about stopping or trying to stop this creeping social division. But that said, I don't think even a significant minority, that's a very small minority of people in the US who are actually taken with this idea of socialism. We have to go out and fight against the Nazis or fight against Antifa, fight against the left, fight against the right, and vice versa. I think there's very few people who actually think that has to be done or are actually engaging in that in any direct way.
Or that seriously, the whites are the superior race.
No.
Like,
it's a nonsense
It's such
idea.
a fringe issue, and it's so bizarre that in the feedback that comes through to the intelligentsia, by the time they cotton on to something much later, what I have in mind is the Pepe meme. When it was obviously, vast majority of it was parody. It was satirical swipes, obviously at ideological, the left, but also at the right. They were taking on, there was a parody people, but that in the telling of it at the level of writing the national narrative through the media and hitting everyone hard over the head with it, Pepe became a Nazi symbol.
Yeah, a frog.
How the fuck?
Pepe the Nazi frog.
So they took something that was a freaking 4chan discussion board and turned it into
trolling,
a national
issue.
What the hell?
Yeah.
I want to show something that got me thinking about this today. Obviously, it's going on nonstop. It's the New York Times today. Can you throw up that article, Scotty? This is their top article today, actually. It's humongous, and we're not going to read it or anything. It's basically...
it's New York Times Magazine.
New York Times Magazine. And they have it on the
Front
top
cover
of their homepage. U.S. law enforcement failed to see the threat of white nationalism. Now they don't know how to stop it.
I mean, that's a perfect example of what I'm talking about.
The image is flicking by. There's Dylan Roof,
yeah,
the killer of the black church 2 years ago. And then they've got neo-Nazi types. And then David Duke pops up. And then Antifa clashes or God knows what. Some terrorist attack, we don't know. And then bodies of someone's funeral. Well, and then that'll be it. The Star of David there is obviously commemorating the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting the other week.
Yeah, well, the title, the headline there is ridiculous. Like, I mean, it's a perfect example of what we're talking about here. U.S. law enforcement failed to see the threat of white nationalism. Now they don't know how to stop it. It's out of control, people.
Yeah.
It's gone live.
Yeah.
It's like, get the National Guard out. The neo-Nazis are going to be rampaging across the US and, killing all the Jews and the blacks and the immigrants and the Muslims
and what it
gay
is,
people.
it's a huge, long article that basically rewrites recent history to fit with what the angle is. Namely, and you see the angle already just in the title, to see the threat of white nationalism. Now, just imagine white was blanked out. That would be the actual headline. We fail to see the threat of nationalism, and now we've lost because politically the people are
nationalized,
resonating in positive civic ways with a nationwide, not ethnicity based, although it will substantially be in white countries. This is one of the sick, manipulative things of this, that white nationalism is a dirty pejorative when all it is an objective description of nationalism in majority white countries. Of course, it's white nationalism as such. It's such a mind fuck,
literally,
Well,
what's amazing to me is that the culture that's happened, the meme essentially that's been spread by the media, that anti-nationalism meme in the US is bizarre. That how quickly it has taken hold. Because for me, for like forever, not being American, but knowing about America and understanding that this is the general perception of people outside of America, and I assume people inside America as well. But foreigners have always viewed America as this country where it was full of people who were super nationalistic. USA, flying the flag. I mean, look at America. Flags on every doorstep, like of every colour and creed. All fly the American flag, love their country. America's the greatest country on the earth. I mean, all of those ideas about America are all the definition of strong nationalistic sentiment among the vast majority of the population. And that has been what America has always been about up until a couple of years ago. And suddenly now it's evil. The media, the most vocal media that get most of the airtime are the ones who are denouncing it and decrying it as if to say this is not what America was ever about. And I'm like, yeah, it was.
Yeah,
it was up until a couple of years ago, forever. And not only is that my opinion, but that's what every single kind of article and newspaper, headline, whatever, over the past 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 years was conveying about America to the rest of the world. Yeah. America is great. America is the best. We love America. All the American people, super nationalistic, love America. It's great. America, 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 America.
I think and it's like they thought that all that was corralled within a safe word. And the safe word in the United States is patriotism.
Same thing.
I know it's the same thing, but they think that that these are separate things. So the nationalism now in this context, when Trump's using it, is something new. New but old. That's creeping back up from the dregs of society.
How nutty do you have to be to say patriotism and nothing to do with nationalism? They're almost interchangeable, patriotism and nationalism.
Well, they are basically, yeah.
Yeah, you could use either word to say the same thing.
Mm-hmm. I know.
So what is the deal here? Is this because different views of America? That's why I think it's the deep state and the U.S. establishment, basically the American exceptionalists, the expansionist Americans who are always behind the scenes, who up until a few years ago used American patriotism and nationalism to spread Americanism or Pax Americana around the world. How great we are, how wonderful we are. We've got and a nationalist sentiment amongst the vast majority of Americans was useful for that, But now because of Trump, they've had to totally turn it around because Trump has taken back the idea of nationalism and patriotism and said, no, it's actually isolationist. Mm-hmm. It's put Americans first. Stop going around the world and wasting American tax dollars on aid programs, to overthrow governments or to infiltrate other countries and get American corporations there, which basically ultimately just drain the American treasury. That's what Trump's saying. So they've had to turn around and start to demonize American patriotism and nationalism because it's no longer, under Trump, being used to service American expansionism. And that's what the people at the top of the pyramid in the US want. They want to control, as they always have done, want to control the world. Not always have done, but certainly increasingly over the past century have increasingly wanted to control as much of the world as possible. Mm-hmm. So now America is it's not about nationalism and patriotism, it's about diversity. It's about, so they think they can do the same kind of thing, where we can still spread American influence around the world under the guise of diversities. Because, how are we going to get all the diverse
and human
ethnicities
rights
and population to come to America if we don't go out there and spread the good word of America under a lefty paradigm now of, anti-nationalistic, because of course, but it's weird, how did America grow over the past century as this really super patriotic country filled with, with 75-80% white people? How did it turn into a multicultural? How did it survive as a flourishing multicultural environment when it was full of white nationalist patriots? Surely they should have been kicking all the blacks and the Jews and the immigrants out over the past 100 years. How does those two things coexist? The point is they can coexist and have coexisted. America has been a very patriotic, nationalistic country, and at the same time, a happily multicultural, ethnic melting pot.
I think,
but now they're saying it's not possible anymore.
We see a delayed reaction change at the highest levels of narrative production. The people who write the articles, who write the think tank papers, the intelligentsia, it's kind of delayed reaction. So back then, the United States was seen as, by everyone, and proudly, put its colors to the mast as, let's say, center-right, capitalism good, communism, socialism bad.
Right.
And anti-imperialists, that's how they were portrayed, but any country then, we're coming out of this is the post-colonial era, so after World War II, all these countries wanted their independence from the previous European empires, right, including some American territories. So they want the avenue of discourse that was available to them to use was largely positioned from a left rhetoric. So although they didn't explicitly go out of their way, some of them, and anyway, to say we're Marxists and we want a revolution to overthrow the capitalist status quo, what they were saying they wanted was independence, nationalism.
Who was saying that?
All these countries, in Africa, in Asia,
former colonial countries,
Latin America, yeah. And the powers that be, largely centered on the US, counterattacked by saying that they were all commies, right, lefties, yeah, and they were going to undo the good deeds of capitalism,
right,
and the great progress under liberal democracy that was blah 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 blah. So they were all pejoratively attacked as being lefty loonies,
right,
when essentially they were nationalists.
Right.
That's what I'm saying. Here's where I get to where there's a delayed reaction. The intelligentsia, over a couple of generations, adapts its discourse, but underlying it wants to do the same thing, impose and maintain the Pax Americana. Oh, but all the world likes lefty stuff and, is anti-aggression, anti-war, anti-imperialist. So they turn around and they develop this kind of humanitarian intervention, right to protect.
Because the development of
human rights. We're bombing you because we want your women to have the vote. All these kinds of things. So it was a kind of a shift. Okay, so this is what the world expects.
It's just shifting narratives then.
Right.
In service to the same agenda, exactly, which is domination of an American exceptionalism, an American
So there's no change, essential change to the status quo globally. So, that means, what does that mean for all those countries then that want independence or a genuine national government that actually, invests the hard-earned resources and labor of their country back into their own country instead of off to Wall Street or London, wherever? Now, the way that's open for them is largely a right-based rhetoric of our own cultural values, our traditional values.
But that's what it always was.
It's what it always was, but it's just a kind of it's a shifting thing at the surface, left, now right, but underlying it is the same essential thing.
Yeah. So nothing has really changed, but it's just a narrative, and that's what we keep saying, is that the media is putting forward a bullshit narrative that's designed to inflame kind of people's, emotions and get them worked up to create the appearance that they're, that they're on different sides. It's like trying to convince as many people as possible that they are divided against each other. They're on diametrically opposed different sides. Like ordinary people in America, for example, are on one side of the fence on the other, and there's never the twain shall meet type thing. And that's not true at all. I mean, obviously there are differences in people, as we've talked about before, in terms of their kind of the way they see the world, their kind of taste buds, as we've mentioned before. But none of those differences are so great that people can't, as they have, generally speaking, always done, found kind of common ground to stand on. So someone, like I keep coming back to this point, that someone is trying to divide the people against each other.
Yeah.
Against themselves.
And what they have to refer to are a string of atrocities, mass shootings, and the mail bomber guy, and then kind of these soundbite political manifestos, statements that they allegedly make as they're carrying it out, or to police after, that are just gold for buttressing this narrative. That white nationalism is metastasizing, as the New York Times put it today. Robert Bowers, the guy who shot up the synagogue, supposedly tells the police they, the Jews, are committing genocide to my people. The mail bomber guy, he's a white nationalist too, but he's not. He's actually of Native American descent. He even doesn't really look like a WASP anyway. There was Charlottesville last year, after that weird thing with some obvious COINTELPRO going on there, with Antifa up against
a bunch of
Unite the Right rallies, which was created in 2016. I mean, it came out of the woodwork. Like, where did they come from? And everyone went, look at all the Nazis in our country. And we were screaming back at you. These are 0.0000. There's no national support for this. Stop falling for the they're trying to lure you into thinking this is a 50-50 split in the population. It doesn't exist. They want to make it exist, and it will grow some legs, but it will never become an actual, honest to God, split down the middle of the country. But there were earlier signs as well. Dylan Roof in 2015, that was the kid who looked like a trailer kid who goes in and shoots up a black church.
Had his head messed with.
In Charleston.
Well, put up that other article just to move in, because I know there's a big long list of these kind of white. Put up that one from the Guardian, Scotty, will you? That article it's from last year, I think, whatever, or a few years ago, but it serves our purposes here. Government agents directly involved in most high-profile U.S. terror plots. Now that speaks directly to the Muslim terror plots that have been going on since 9/11 in the U.S. And most people know, I think, that have any sense, know that are aware of that information already, and know that a lot of those terror plots were designed to create. The details of them are that the FBI basically would find some vulnerable guy, usually some kind of low IQ guy, and they would use their informants to pretend they were members of Al Qaeda or ISIS or something, and go down and talk to the guy and say, "Hey, you want to join Al Qaeda? You want to get some guns and blow up
Sears
Tower maybe, or you want to blow up anything?" And the guy's like, "Oh yeah." Well, the guy's like, "Yeah, I would, but I don't have any money." "Hey, we've got money. You want some money? Here's a gun, or here's a bomb. You want to go and do it? Do you? Go on. Here." And will you swear an oath to Al Qaeda? So record him doing all this stuff, and then when he goes down with his fake bomb, from Toys R Us, given to him by the FBI, to do the bombing, they pick him up and say, "Gotcha." Terror plot exposed, and it's complete nonsense, and that's pretty much a template for. I mean, you can apply that then to. I mean, any reasonable person would assume that if that's going on with Islamic terror plots, then it's also going on with white nationalist kind of shootings and attacks. These people can have their heads messed with. I mean, anybody who knows what COINTELPRO is knows that that's pretty much. I mean, COINTELPRO goes back to the 60s and 70s, or even beforehand in the US, where the FBI was infiltrating various different groups and making them do things to because they were a threat to national security. They decided they didn't like these people for political reasons or whatever, and they would make them look bad by setting them up to carry out, put them in bad situations, basically make them look like they were a bunch of terrorists. I mean, so that's bread and butter for the FBI and other intel agencies in the US. So you apply exactly the same thing to these kind of like this list that is in the Washington Post article or Washington Times Magazine article that we showed there a minute ago. This long list of supposed white extremist attacks over the past, whatever it is, since 2008, the past 10 years, you apply the same COINTELPRO, FBI manipulation tactics to a lot of those, and you realize that, somebody's probably in positions of power in the US and intelligence agencies are deliberately creating these kind of events so that the New York Times Magazine can then write a big long article about them and say, see all the white nationalist terrorism that's been going on in the past 10 years. It's out of control, people. But that's not to say that it's all totally manipulated. Again, we go back to what we said beforehand, which is that there's been a climate of insecurity and fear has been created in the US and in other Western European countries in particular, other countries around the world, in fact, but as a result of 9/11 and the US-led war on terror. I mean, after 9/11, a lot of people in the US were out to get the Muslims. They didn't like Muslims. There was a lot of actually in that list they put down a bunch of, I think they went back to 9/11 or post 9/11 at the very end of their list of, or maybe it's not in the article. It's actually in a list of terror, white domestic terrorism, not white domestic terrorism, but domestic terrorism in the US since 9/11, and they included at the very beginning the many attacks against people that happened immediately after 9/11 by ordinary Americans who went out to get Muslims for knocking down our buildings, right? So that continued on with the war on terror and the invasion of Iraq. There was a demonization of Muslims. So what do you expect? What do you expect if in such a climate when people go out and shoot up a mosque or attack Muslims or whatever? And so there is a climate that's created by the powers that be that work people up and will create a situation where at the very least, we have a lot of material in terms of ordinary people who can be easily manipulated by intelligence agencies to going and carrying out an attack against a Jewish synagogue or attack against a Muslim mosque or any number of other types of attacks,
I want to show something else now from quartz.com. Scotty, have you got this one? Yeah, there. That was it. Headline: Terrorism is surging in the U.S., fueled by right-wing ideologies. And I was wondering about it. They have some objective data. They cite this and another article. They cite
tiki torches. Look at all the tiki torches.
I think they cite some global terrorist database. If we just look at the first couple of paragraphs here, terrorism is in retreat globally. Attacks fell from around 17,000 in 2014 to about 11,000 last year, but not in the US. In the US, there's been a surge in terrorism. And I'm not sure what they're defining exactly as terrorism, but anyway, the trend is in reverse. And then they have a little chart there to show you terrorist attacks in the United States are going up. And there's 2015 there towards the right of the bar chart. I was wondering about this because it struck me this summer, I think it's still the case, that so far in 2018, there has not been a single, beyond the death of a couple of people somewhere in southern France, actually, there's not been a ISIS/Al-Qaeda type blamed on Muslim terror attack anywhere in the West so far this year. There's been crickets. But there's a lot of stuff still happening. Obviously there's the recent, I think, in the United States with the man and his mail bombs. And,
keep going down there. It says most attacks in 2017 were thought to be motivated by right-leaning ideologies. But it ends up that out of 65 incidents, 37 were tied to racist, anti-Muslim, homophobic, anti-Semitic, fascist, anti-government, or xenophobic motivation.
Which kind of covers everything, no?
Is that all right-leaning? Racist, anti-Muslim, homophobic, anti-Semitic, okay. Fascist, well, fascism, they're throwing that word around. I don't think they know it means what they think it means. Anti-government? Hang on a minute.
Right.
Is that not lefty? Anti-government? I mean, this is the problem with these terms. It's ridiculous. There's something else going on here. You know what I mean? Where they're trying to create the impression of what we're talking about basically here, which is a white nationalist rising, in the US when it's complete and utter horseshit.
Quartz published that in August, 2 months ago. So soon afterwards, the British did the same. I have an independent article from mid-September.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was it. Yes, this one. You scroll down there for the headline. Number of white people arrested for terror offences outstrip any other single ethnic group. And that was the first time since 2001. That's in the UK.
Do you realise how crazy it is that within, like, literally almost probably, the past 2 years maybe at most, terrorism has gone from being Muslim terrorism.
It still is, a little.
No,
but
not according to that headline.
Yeah.
That's what I mean, not according to that headline.
Well,
according to that headline,
in the prisons, the majority are still
I know, but
Muslim origin
those are all
in the UK.
Those are all
details.
Those are all details and facts that are relevant to,
the headline
to newspaper headlines and to what they want people to believe, which is what they say there. The number of white people arrested for terror offences outstrip any other single ethnic group. The point being, what people are being told is that now,
white is a problem.
After 17 years of being told that Muslims, sorry for, is that a bad word for Muslims? Muzzies?
Whitey anyway, muzzies, come on, equal opportunities.
All right, I can call them muzzies. That muzzies are that's where all of the terrorism comes from. It comes from Islam in the Western world, and now it's all change. Next stop, white terrorism. In fact, we're already there. It's outstripped the Muslims. And it's like, when did this happen? Who? How? What?
Very recently. This is going on right now.
All of a sudden, don't you have to have a build up for that kind of thing? Or is it just pre-made, ready to be launched? Like, pull back the curtain, boom, there you go. White terrorism.
Government policy is catching up. Now, this is going on a while. It's obviously building up. And now we want to show you the next article from The Guardian, published last week. MI5. It's one about MI5.
I've got two about MI5.
The one you're on now. MI5 provides... No, excuse me. That's next. The first one. Yeah, that one. This is last week. MI5 to take over in fight against rise of UK right-wing extremism. So this is policy, government policy catching up with this new market, in quotes, for domestic, or more importantly, the way they're spinning it.
Well, what happens when MI5, British intelligence, takes over a fight against the rise of some kind of extremism or terrorism? It actually increases because they start perpetrating it.
Exactly.
I mean, that's historically what has happened. I mean, I know that for a fact from personal experience that the MI5 in Northern Ireland, when they became involved in that conflict, suddenly the number of attacks and shootings and stuff skyrocketed because they basically wanted it to happen.
MI5 is to take the lead in combating. Scroll down to the third paragraph, short one there. The decision means that extreme right-wing activity, which is it's synonymous in the current dominant narrative with white nationalism, will now be officially designated as posing a major threat to national security. This is interesting because this isn't just a shift in, like, especially in the UK's case. The UK kind of transitioned almost seamlessly from 3 decades of, sorry, we need emergency measures because of those Irish terrorists, to, sorry, we need emergency measures because of those Muslim terrorists, to, sorry, we need emergency measures because, actually, it's because of you.
Because of white terrorism.
But that's an interesting change.
So terrorism. They just want
now it's so broad. Well, it's all of you.
Mm.
All of you under the watchful eye of us.
Yeah.
You are all potential terrorists.
But that's a real mind job, like, because we've mentioned this before, and I mentioned it kind of more or less earlier in the show here, that for 17 years, the media and the government terrorize the people, and the media programs the people with, repeatedly, almost, every day in some way or other, and then with major terror attacks by Muslims, etc. Program the people, and of course they're waging a war on, effectively, what everybody understands to be Muslim terrorism. So for 17 years, you're waging a full-scale war on Muslim terrorism. Well, you start off with the 9/11 attacks, spectacular attacks, leave you in no doubt Muslims are evil. Then you launch a worldwide war on Muslims, effectively, on Muslim terrorism, because Muslim is synonymous with terrorism, and you tell people for 17 years that's the case. And then, as part of your war on terrorism, which is a war of conquest and expansion, you bomb a bunch of Muslim countries and create a migrant flow, refugee flow from those countries into European countries in America, then when people that you've been programming with the idea that Muslims are terrorists, when they respond to this influx of Muslims from these countries that you've been bombing, when people respond to that by saying, no effing way, get them out, you say, you freaking racist.
You terrorist.
How dare you? And not just racist, you're the terrorist now.
Yeah.
For not allowing the terrorists, which is what the people understand them to be, into your country. I mean, that's a serious mind job.
I know.
You're a terrorist for not allowing the terrorists into your country.
And it's no
who's
wonder,
not a terrorist, Mr. Government?
When it's spelled out like that, it's no wonder that people see the hidden hand, but see agency in it. And of course, then they get attacked. Oh God, the crazy tinfoil hat wearing conspiracy theorists for daring to suggest that. But when you spell it out in a broad sweep, it took a generation. But there is a crazy manipulation going on. It's not necessarily being done consciously. It's just one thing feeds into the next.
Well, I don't even have to call it conspiracy theory. I don't have to say that there's a hidden hand behind it, blah, blah, doing this. I can just say you cannot disagree with me that things are massively effed up and there's massive mismanagement at the level of government when you have that kind of situation that I just described.
Yeah.
Where people are being called terrorists for not letting terrorists into their country.
Which is breeding actual nationalism, a kind of a real...
Which is probably the only genuine response, even though it's a manipulative response, and we don't support the kind of nationalist response, to our xenophobia, the rise of xenophobic ideas and anti-immigrant and anti-other sentiment within Western countries. We don't agree with that, but we're not going to blame the people for having those feelings and those ideas when they have been propagandized against for 17 years in the most brutal way, i.e. by blowing up, shopping centres, cinemas, mass shootings, slaughtering them en masse in concert halls in France, like in the Bataclan. We're not going to blame the people because they've basically been massively trauma-based programmed to believe, and as far as they're concerned, it's true because they see the dead bodies. They see the people slaughtered in the street. They see the media saying these are Muslims. And when they see the Muslims then being let into their country, I'm not going to blame the people for saying, hang on an effing minute, we're not doing that. And then to turn around and call them racist for it and to...
Just last week, Anjem Choudhury, renowned radical Wahhabi Islamic
in the UK
cleric in the UK, was released from prison. He's linked with so many things that is probably ridiculous, but I don't think there's any doubt that he is connected with some criminal activities, not least inciting impressionable young Muslims in the UK to join terrorist groups, but also raising funding. Right. And going back to the 90s, the Bosnian War, this guy is up to his neck in it. At one point, a few years ago, he was outed basically as British intelligence. That's not a secret anymore. But last week, he was let out of prison. And people already know that he's tainted by association as an informant, a high-level informant of the British, of MI5. And they let him out. What are they going to think when he's allowed to go free, but they're going to arrest somebody for wanting to speak about nationalism?
Or wanting him back in prison.
Right. It's crazy. And like you mentioned, MI5, this isn't just, this isn't a small announcement. MI5 taking on basically opening its books to any and everyone who dissents with the government.
Yeah. But you can
being a potential terrorist, or certainly a white extremist. Right. This is the same MI5 that also in the last couple of weeks, it was revealed. I mean, it's publicly acknowledged. That's what's interesting. We know it. You've lived it. We know it, though, that MI5 operates under a special government policy called Third Direction, which means that it has full impunity to engage in criminal acts.
They can kill people.
Not least fomenting, actually creating extremist cells.
As a way to see what happens.
See what happens.
Try and bait the actual extremists out of their holes. That's how you do it. But what if there are no extremists in their holes, but you create a kind of terror group or an extremist group on the premise that, well, we've got to find out where the extremists are. They're hiding. So we got to create this high-profile extremist group that'll attract all these extremists, and nobody comes out of their holes. Well, we're just not being extremist enough. We have to make them more extremist. Well, how far do you want to go? Well, maybe we should have them carry out some kind of a terror attack to really embolden, to encourage the ones that are hiding in the holes. But well, you can keep going then. I mean, and you never need to have anybody in any holes. There are none. You create one yourself. And I don't believe at it for a second that is at the higher levels that is just, naivety or stupidity or ignorance. These people are. I mean, you can get yourself a long way in understanding what's going on in the world today and the chaos and the terror attacks and all that kind of stuff when you, by simply positing that an anti-terror government organization needs terrorism to exist to justify their ever-increasing budget. They need increasing levels of terrorism to justify their jobs and their big government budgets. So you just put it down to self-interest and you get a very long way.
That was explicitly said by a top US, I think he was a New York police chief.
Right.
After retiring, budgets.
Justify your budget.
We needed to keep it going.
That's
why we did all those sting operations.
Yeah. Right, because they need a threat, because they want to keep the money flowing. And the government wants the money to keep flowing from the taxpayers into the government so then it can give it to these intelligence agencies. And that's not even talking about there being a conscious plot to kind of divide and conquer the population, to keep them divided against each other so that the overall rule of the establishment can be maintained. Because obviously, when there's trouble in society in general, when there's terror attacks, you need your intelligence agencies who fight terrorism, right? And they get to keep their jobs and get extra budgets. But the government itself, the overarching government structure, is needed when society is in trouble, when there's chaos.
Mm-hmm.
But I want everybody to know why they need us, right?
Right.
And if they don't get it, then beat them, or have some ethnic strife going on, or not ethnic strife, but civil discord going on, so that people will remember why they need a strong government. Why they need to keep paying money for tax money to us.
Is it possible that these people are supremely wise and they've been doing all this, creating terrorism along the lines of what they call counterinsurgency when they go abroad? You create the phony opposition in order to justify your military presence there. I mean, are they doing it? Is it a wisdom that's levels beyond we can comprehend? So in this situation, there's going to be actual chaos. And then they'll be needed because there's actual chaos.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, in the actual national widespread chaos, will they be totally useless because they won't actually know?
They won't be able to do anything about it.
And that's why they're being thrown out on their ass by large numbers of people the world over. Because even if they can't articulate all the things we've just said or see it as clearly or as viscerally, they know something has to change.
Yeah.
Because the wrong people, they're not adult-like. There's something pathologically wrong with them.
Well, they're absolute. It's wishful thinking, and they're deluded effectively. But crazy people can get quite far if they're smart enough and they have a lot of power and resources and stuff. A crazy person can go on for quite a long time. But I mean, in the aftermath of the terror attacks over the past few years in France, French government ministers, and I think British government ministers were saying the same thing, more or less, that they said explicitly, the people are just going to have to accept that terror attacks are now a part of reality, which is exactly the wrong thing to say, because it really pissed people off, because the attitude of the people is, well, what good are you then?
Yeah, we want to hear that you're winning.
You're meant to be protecting us. That's the whole idea. That's why we invest you with the power of the people type thing and to make the decisions for us so that you can keep us safe from these big issue threats that are beyond our ability to control. When you actually come out and explicitly say, well, this thing my only job description, I'm not going to be able to fulfill that anymore. So it's like, well, you've just invalidated your own job, basically, or your own position. But yeah, they're stupid. But I suppose they think that they can just keep the people divided, keep people distracted. I mean, it's a classic situation. And when I say it's as old as time, I'm not joking. It's as old as time, that idea of divide and conquer. to keep the people distracted by infighting amongst themselves, so that they don't bother the government. The government can stay in power untouched, untroubled by all the things that they should be troubled by, which is, people's anger at their corruption and fecklessness. So yeah, it's not a mystery basically, but and it's not a conspiracy theory either. It's just a fact of life, unfortunately.
Yeah. There's one other one I wanted to mention, but it stands out again because it's so political and didn't fit with the war on terror period that we're, I suppose, emerging from. Scott, can you bring back up? We've already shown this article. It's the one that MI5 sought immunity for. Excuse me, no, it's not that one. It's the other Guardian one. Yeah. Just go up. Just look at, this is the image they chose to show with that. So obviously this is recent news. This is from just last week, announcing that policies.
Oh, that's Joe Cox.
Just Joe Cox. So you remember her? So it's just before the eve of the referendum, in-out referendum in the UK. She was killed by a guy who supposedly shouted as he was shooting her 3 times and stabbing her. I don't know, did one hand have the knife, whatever. Britain first, Britain first. Later at his trial, this guy's Thomas Mayer. At his trial, he's supposed to have shouted, "This is for Britain. Britain will always come first." He had a history of mental issues, like big time, and he was also
Britannia.
He was also a member of one of these probably cardboard cutout COINTELPRO groups in the United States called National Alliance. I'd never heard of them before, but anyway, no one probably ever heard of them until this incident happened. But it's just weird that happens right on the eve. I mean, maybe it was meant to sway the result or something, but either way, it cast a shadow over. And it was I suppose in the narrative making, it's supposed to be like nationalism bad, see? Ergo EU and globalism good. I suppose that's maybe the intended, but it jarred because it didn't fit. It's supposed to be at this point, 15 years later, a muzzy. That's the only reason it works in the war on terror context. But now you're saying it's a constituent of the MP, a local, doing it for Britain. But that's his soundbite political manifesto. It's for Britain. ... What? What for Britain? What is your politics? He has none, because that's all we were supposed to hear from it. So yeah, it's growing on me that we're transitioning now. I mean, there are still terror things that are blamed on ISIS or lone wolf Muslims in the United States and in Britain and elsewhere. That probably won't go away yet, but I think it is massively dried up because Russia went into Syria and cleaned house. That's also not over yet, but substantially, which means all those one after the other news non-stop barrage of ISIS has kidnapped and abducted all these, and remember the videos, they're cutting heads off, all that just dried right up. Because how could they be proliferating and doing all that if they're being bombed from the air by Russian MiGs and Su-57? So oops, that's gone. And now we're transitioning into a kind of like what if I imagined a deviant mind was thinking at the beginning. The war on terror they always wanted. It's the war on dissidents. And they still have a 2-track. It's not quite syncing up into one perfect narrative.
What do you mean by dissidents?
Dissidents.
What do they mean by dissidents?
Anyone who doesn't agree with how they think things should be run. And
what is that?
Everything from fracking. That was announced a few years ago when the Secretary General of NATO, Rasmussen, literally said that all the anti-fracking protests and protest organizations in the United Kingdom and in the US, these last, whatever, it had been 10 years at that point, as an environmental movement was being done by Russia to make us divided in on ourselves. Dissent, anyone expressing anything that can be portrayed as nationalist and not globalist. Anyone who suggests that the media might lie from time to time, freedom of the press. Anyone who says anything along the lines of America first, Britain first, country X first, that's bad, that's racist, that's xenophobic, it's not inclusive.
Right. And they don't like people who talk about Western values either.
Right.
Western values.
Traditional values.
Traditional Western values, whatever, because it's ethnically kind of insular or closed, let's say. And why don't they like that? Why do they not like nationalism?
Because they thought they've reached the end of history where the earth is one national terrain.
Is one big melting pot.
It's one terrain. It's one
nation.
There's no borders.
There's something more to it where they don't want,
They don't want diversity. They are absolute. They want. They keep saying it.
They want diversity.
But actually, they're terrified of it. When there is a diverse idea emerging from Moscow about 10 years ago, when Putin gets up and says, maybe this unipolar idea isn't so good.
They want diversity as it's understood today, which is a leftist ideal, which is basically a mixing of all kind of races and creeds and
all following the same monoculture.
Right.
There can be no diverse cultures where Russia takes its own independent development policy, where China takes its own independent development policy, which is why they call Xi Jinping a nationalist too, and that completely freaking jars because he's not white. They were always anti-fascist. They don't have a history of invading other people, but you're somehow leaving it nebulously associated that he's also Hitler because he's a nationalist. Right. It doesn't work, and they know it. So they shut up after saying, he's a bit of a nativist nationalist himself, ... And they just leave it hanging in.
He's not allowed to think about the interests of China, basically.
No.
Very bad. It means he's Hitler. Well, that's something I was saying to someone last night, actually, about the whole diversity thing. And it's a problem with these terms that we keep having, where they don't mean anything. They're just thrown around and they're completely divorced from their original or even dictionary meaning. Like, people are using terms like nationalist or fascist or diversity and stuff. And what do you mean by diversity? Is it a dictionary term, or is it your own special term that has a special meaning for you when you meet it, when you use it? Like diversity doesn't make any sense. I mean, in terms of the way the lefties would kind of use it today. They want diversity, i.e. they're pro-immigration. They want diversity into America. They want lots of different ethnicities and cultures and religions to come to America and to be tolerated and to be embraced into the American system because diversity. But what they don't seem to understand is that America is a monoculture. It's a consumerist monoculture. And there is no diversity. If you take people from, say, India or some African country or the Middle East or anywhere with their actual cultural differences and religious differences, and you bring them to America, they are very quickly subsumed into the American monoculture. So diversity is gone. Mm-hmm. The only way you can have real diversity is have people standing up for their culture and their values and their religious beliefs, if any, and to keep them kind of largely protected from other cultures. You don't water them down. You don't establish a unifying culture that is some kind of a blending of all of them into some kind of watered down. I mean, in today, and it's America who's promoting that, and on what the culture that America promotes is basically Coca-Cola, right? I mean, it's a Coca-Cola culture. That's not very diverse or interesting. What's interesting is the cultures or the religions in other countries where they are, where they grew. And they should be protected in those countries where they are so that people can go and have the exchanges, have cultural exchanges, have, education exchanges, whatever. But you don't bring everybody into a country like America is today and expect that you're going to maintain some kind of actual, real, diversity of culture or religion. It's just going to be turned into Mickey Mouse culture.
The thing is, when it's got to the point that they're going into a new country, when they're there, it's good and it's proper and it's what happens anyway. It might take a generation, but it happens. The newly arrived should integrate with the new country, and they do.
Right. Yeah, but they integrate into a predominantly white American, Western, Christian, capitalist culture. So what happened to Hinduism and what happened to socialism or whatever differences that came from their country of origin? Where are they going to go? You can't have them all at the same time. One country needs one kind of system, essentially. You know what I mean? For people, it has to be, generally speaking, it should have one language to be effective.
The Chinese would argue otherwise. They say one country, two system. Because they have actually a subsystem, a separate system, basically, for Hong Kong.
Well, but that's because they're British.
Yeah.
But I don't think any country would any country with defined borders and a defined group of people in it generally all end up speaking something approximating the same language, and they have a shared culture so that they can all kind of understand each other and engage in business deals, have a business culture that's similar, that's all based on a certain type of transaction that everybody can trust and know how it's going to work. You have to have confidence that when you go and talk to someone or you go and do a business deal with them, that there aren't going to be radically different cultural norms that might influence your, the way you do business with them. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know if you give the person money that they're actually going to give you what you give them money for, because maybe that's not the way their culture works. I mean, that no country can survive with radically different cultural or business or, you can have different religions to some extent in different parts of the country and stuff, but that very often has been the cause of kind of conflict as well. I'm not saying it can't happen, but the idea that it's just a ridiculously idealistic, nonsensical idea that by bringing other cultures into America, that you're going to maintain those cultures inside America. You're not. It's like dumping some. Let me see. It'd be like in the case of Mexicans, for example, or South Americans coming to America, it'd be like putting one drop of Tabasco sauce into a vat of Coca-Cola.
It would spoil the whole lot.
It wouldn't spoil it. No, you wouldn't notice it.
You wouldn't notice it
at all. It's
so
gone.
Overpowering.
It's been subsumed. Where's the diversity in that? It's just Coca-Cola. Can't even taste the Tabasco sauce. I know Tabasco sauce probably isn't even Mexican, but well, I think it is. Is it, Scotty?
I don't know.
It's on there somewhere on the label. Somebody look it up. Anyway, it was just an example of what I'm trying to say. It was an analogy. So yeah, diversity is nonsense the way these people present it today, and I think there's nothing wrong.
And they don't
proper diversity is specific cultural groups and religious or whatever you define by their culture, whatever makes them distinct, should be maintained. If it has value, I suppose, maintain it in the place where it developed, and then you can have all sorts of cross-cultural meetings and links and visits and experiences. That's the way the world worked for a lot of history. But dumping everybody into one country and mixing it all together, that's what's happened in America. And we still have a dominant kind of capitalist Christian kind of culture, right? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
Most black people, look at blacks in America who came, from a few hundred years ago, whatever, came from originally from Africa into the Caribbean and into America, or the slave trade and all that kind of stuff. They didn't did any of them maintain their original African religion or cultural habits?
There have been various ways.
After 100 or 200 years, it's gone.
It. There have been postmodern attempts to sort of revivify it, but it's only based on what they've read in books. There is no cultural connection.
As an example, look what happened to the 9/11 hijackers. Do you remember?
Mm-hmm.
Muhammad Atta?
What they were doing the night before.
Yeah. But they were Muslim, right? They were devout Muslims, supposedly, right? Because they had to be to engage in this kind of jihad against America and carry out the 9/11 attacks.
Yeah.
Muhammad Atta came. He was only there for a couple of weeks, and he was down at a strip bar eating pork and snorting cocaine.
Yeah.
All three things that are totally against his original Islamic culture. That's the effect of America. 2 weeks and you're done. It's gone. Your culture's gone. That was a slam dunk right there. Well, that was a mic drop moment. I can't drop this mic though. Stuck to an arm.
We should probably wrap it up.
Yeah.
Before we say anything controversial.
We already did. We already did, which is talking sense. Which is controversial. It's very controversial. You're not allowed to.
Well, this is the silver lining in all this, okay? They're becoming more honest with where they want to go with this, which is that just speaking common sense is now going to be a criminal activity.
Yeah.
So we'll no longer have the confusion, like, for example, where Lauren Southern went to the UK to give a talk, but was detained at the border and prevented then from going in and giving her talk under terrorism charges that she was totally bamboozled by, because it's like, but that law was set up for fighting terrorists, like Muslim terrorists. What's that got to do with me? And now, thankfully, in quotes, policy is shifting where it's much more clear cut. No, you're the terrorist in the eyes of the powers that be because you're a dissident.
Right. Yeah. We'll have to wait and see where it goes, if it goes anywhere. They're making a good attempt at it, obviously, right now to really impose this bizarre, ridiculous, counterintuitive, illogical view or worldview on people, and force people to accept it and agree it and say, oh yeah, that makes sense, because, it really doesn't make sense anymore. And the only thing stopping some people from realizing it doesn't make sense is they're not really thinking about it enough, Just follow it through, People are too fond of, simplistic black and white thinking, because thinking's hard, and I prefer to just go with the catchphrase, and join a cause, Bad idea. Look at history. It's a bad idea when you join a cause, unthinkingly, especially one that's, catches on like wildfire. Bad idea. If it's not a slow, long-term kind of cause that has been in the background, has been growing for a long time and has a lot of evidence, really fundamental reasons, good reasons why you should join a cause. If it's not that, if it just comes out of nowhere and suddenly you find yourself caught up in it, you're probably making a mistake.
Yeah.
Yeah. So don't make mistakes. Think about things.
Try to falsify yourself, anything you find yourself believing.
Yeah.
Really give it a rigorous, honest, try to see it from another perspective and go, what's really here? And you'll find that most of it's dross.
Yeah.
So
take it as given that you generally don't know what you're talking about. It works for me. Anyway, thanks for, we're going to end it here. Thanks for watching, listening, whatever. If you like the video, click like it or something and subscribe. We'll be back next week with one more show on another topic. Until then, have a good day.
See you next week. Bye-bye.